There's a new Raspberry Pi. Tell us about it.
There's Raspberry Pi 2 out on the 2nd of February. It's a Raspberry Pi, but it's got a quad-core processor. It's got a gigabyte of RAM. But in all other respects, it's just a Raspberry Pi. So it's got the I/O is the same, the multimedia is the same, and the form factor is the same, and the price is the same. So it's $35.
What's the difference do you think the quad-core processor is going to make?
I think it's going to make a big difference to anyone who wants to do image processing. So I think there are good kind of makery, embedded-y things that will really benefit from that, and they'll probably benefit from the extra memory as well. The other thing, I guess, is that this is something that's it moves us over that line into being a PC. So this really is now a plausible entry-level PC. We think that's really important for the education mission because it improves the chance that people are actually going to choose to use this machine as their children are going to choose to use this machine as their main computer. And then that means we've got a generation of kids with a main computer that's very, very hackable, which is kind of what we wanted all along.
Yeah. So what else has changed apart from the quad-core? Is there anything else?
So apart from the quad-core and the additional memory, absolutely nothing. So we've been very, very, very careful to keep everything else the same in the platform. That means all those tutorials online are going to work. It means all of our tutorials are going to work. It means hopefully it's going to be a very smooth transition for people from Raspberry Pi 1 to Raspberry Pi 2.
Does that mean there's software compatibility?
Absolutely. So you obviously, this is now an ARM v7 processor, unlike the ARM v6, ARM 11 that was in the Raspberry Pi 1. So you need a new kernel, you need a new set of kernel modules. So the SD card image that we're releasing has those on it. Other than that, in userland, exactly the same.
Maybe talk slightly about the difference between V6 and V7 for those people might not understand what the difference is.
Okay, so ARM release versions of their instruction set architecture every few years. ARM v5 was around for a very, very long time in the early part of last decade, middle part of last decade. They brought in ARM v6. The ARM 11 processor, there are two numbering schemes, right? There's the numbering schemes for versions of the architecture, and there's a numbering scheme for cores. So the ARM 11, which we used in Raspberry Pi 1, was I think basically the only ARM v6, the only instantiation of the ARM v6 ARM architecture that was out there. After ARM 11, ARM released another version of the architecture called ARM v7, and have subsequently since then released a large number of processors which use the ARM v7 architecture. We're using the Cortex A7, which is one of those processors.
But in all other aspects, the chip that's on this Raspberry Pi is the same as the SoC that was on there before.
That's right. So the SoC, which was on Raspberry Pi 1, was the PCM2835. This is the PCM2836, which was named with shocking originality.
So what sort of opportunities do you think this new thing will open up for makers? What sort of use cases do you see as being critical for the increased performance?
Yeah, I think there are use cases, there are maker use cases which will really benefit. Image processing is a big one. So robotics, we see people building pieces of hardware, robotic hardware, that often uses either a USB webcam or more commonly the Raspberry Pi camera accessory that we have. Yeah. And they want to be able to crunch through whatever data comes back from that and make decisions based on that data. OpenCV runs on Raspberry Pi 1, it's quite slow. Runs on Raspberry Pi 2, it's an awful lot faster.
Out of the box, everything's going to run on the multi-core just fine?
Yeah, so there are quite a lot of things which will benefit. Codecs in particular, I mean, OpenCV is a good example, but video codecs are pretty well parallelized. People have there's 10 or 15 years experience now of getting those sorts of workloads onto multi-core processors. So there are some places where you're going to see really spectacular performance improvements. You can decode really fairly high resolution video purely in software on Raspberry Pi 2, which is nice. There are places where we're going to, and then there's general parallelism in the system. So quite a lot of applications, something like XBMC has some parallelism there that you can exploit. There are places where we're going to have to do some work. We've done some work on the browser already. I don't think that's quite going to make it out of the door in time for launch. We've already done some work on the browser to parallelize rendering and image decode across those cores.
The Linux distribution going to use is Raspbian again?
That's right. So we're not at the moment planning to move up to there is obviously, Raspbian is a community-driven rebuild of the ARM v7 HF Debian, but with the ARM v7 bits taken out, so with the ARM v7 instructions disabled. There is a mainline Debian ARM v7 HF. We could run that on Raspberry Pi 2. We're not planning to do that in the first instance. So what we're going to do, we're going to ship with Raspbian, and we're going to, over the next 3 months, do a benchmarking exercise to figure out whether there would be any benefit of using the mainline. We'd really prefer not to, because obviously we still have a lot of Raspberry Pi. We don't want to orphan all those. We've got 4.5 million Raspberry Pis out there, right? We don't want to orphan all those people, and we don't want the burden of maintaining a Raspbian SD card image and a Debian SD card image. So what I'm hoping is we'll find that there are some benefits available to us from using ARMv7, but that we can snipe those benefits out. So go ship an ARMv7 Pixman, go ship an ARMv7 libav, maybe 5, 10, 20 other things. And if we can if there's low-hanging fruit to grab, we'll go grab that. And hopefully we can avoid having to move to upstream.
So effectively what you're going to ship initially is a SD card with 2 separate kernels on it, a v6 kernel and a v7 kernel, and modules, obviously.
Yes, and a single v6 userland.
Yeah, and all of the userland applications will be ARM v6 compiled.
Correct, yeah.
A lot of the maker community don't really realise what Raspberry Pi is about. They see it as a board that's had a lot of success, but they don't really understand where it came from originally. Do you want to talk briefly about that, the educational mission of the foundation?
Sure. So Raspberry Pi is kind of unusual for a computer company that sold 4.5 million computers. We're a charity, so we're not-for-profit. You can see behind me some of the fruits of the not-for-profitiness. We exist to try and get kids programming. As a group of people who had computers as kids, and I guess all of us who are in this office here, to a greater or lesser extent, owe our careers and the things that have happened to us in our lives to the fact we had hackable hardware when we were kids. And it's a group of people who looked around 6 or 7 years ago and thought, hang on a second, where's all the hackable hardware? Obviously there are hackable platforms, but the majority of platforms, particularly in children's hands, are not hackable at all. Games consoles. No one ever bought a games console and then accidentally became a games programmer, right? There's no flow for it. So really, that's what Raspberry Pi exists to do. We exist to make fun, hackable hardware for kids. The fun is important. We want to make pieces of hardware. It's one of the reasons why Raspberry Pi 2 is important, because it increases the amount of fun you can have, right? You can use this, you can go surf the web, you can use this as your main computer. So it'll do the things that kids find interesting. So we want to have something which is fun, so it gets into kids' hands. Once it's in kids' hands, it's hackable, so they can actually have those kinds of experiences we had when we were kids. You're
moving into the US education market as well?
Yeah, so the US is our biggest market, our biggest hobbyist market. We sell something like twice as many units in the US as we sell anywhere else. But as a charity, most of our knowledge of education systems is based in the UK. We have this kind of hometown kind of thing. It is important if we're going to achieve our mission. It's important for us to understand how the education system works in other countries. Of course, in the US, well, the US is kind of 50 countries, right? 50 education systems. Obviously, they tend to cluster. I think there's this feeling that if you can go and make your support material support California, Texas, and New York, that actually hoovers up a lot of other states as well. And we're very close to being in compliance with a lot of other states. So we're just putting our toe in the water. Obviously, we've hired Matt Richardson at the start of January this year. He's our first North American employee. One of the things that we're hoping he'll do for us is to give us a little bit of insight into how the US education system works, so we can tune some of the work that we do here to be more relevant.
So how do you think that the new Pi is going to further the education mission? How is this optimized for education?
The new Pi obviously runs the educational software applications we care about better than the old Pi.
Yeah.
So Scratch, for example, which is the poster child, something we've actually spent a lot of money on the software side, runs much better on Raspberry Pi 2 than it did on Raspberry Pi 1. So I think all of those education things are better on Pi 2 than they are on Pi 1. I think more importantly though, its viability as a general purpose computer gets it into more hands, and anything that gets Raspberry Pi into more people's hands improves our chances of accomplishing the mission. We don't want people necessarily buying Raspberry Pis for laudable reasons. We don't want them buying them as this kind of worthy platform to learn to code on. We want to buy them because they're fun devices, and then discover that they're platforms that they can code on.
There's also the other models, like there's the B+, and there's the A+, and there's the compute module.
Yeah, kind of got a product line now, right?
Yeah, there's like a whole range. So how does this new board affect those products?
Right, so Model B and Model B Plus remain in production. We think there are industrial customers who are going to want to stick with those boards. Demand for the B is finally starting to ramp down. I mean, we're now still over 6 months after the launch of the B Plus, and people are finally starting to convert their products across from using B to B Plus. So B stays in production for as long as there's demand. B plus stays in production for as long as there's demand. I think there will be demand for B plus for at least another year. A plus, our $20 unit remains. That's the anchor now. That's the low end anchor. This thing is technically a Raspberry Pi 2 Model B. There's room in the namespace for a Raspberry Pi 2 Model A, but we have no plans this year to do I don't think we can afford this year to do anything particularly interesting at that $20 price point. So A plus stays down there, anchoring the low end for us. Compute module obviously is starting to take off now. There's no immediate plan to do we could do a Raspberry Pi 2 compute module. Right now I think the compute module is what people want, and we're going to stick with that for a little while.
And where do you see this going in the future then? Do you see a Raspberry Pi Model 3 coming along?
So I'm not going to talk about unannounced products. There we are, you see. So I've transitioned, and I'm going to say I'm not going to talk about unannounced products. I mean, obviously, in the future we might try and do something, but we probably ought to talk about it. Particularly today, on the day we launch Raspberry Pi 2, I should probably not talk about Raspberry Pi.
In closing then, it was 3 years the Model B sort of stuck around for, really. Do you see this sticking around for another 3 years?
I think all of the products will stick around as long as, whenever we introduce the Raspberry Pi 3 that I'm not going to talk about. Whenever we introduce another product, I think we're establishing a tradition that with the solitary exception of the original Model A, we don't end of life stuff. As long as people want to buy Model Bs, Raspberry Pi 1 Model Bs, we'll keep making Raspberry Pi 1 Model Bs. As long as people want to buy Raspberry Pi 2s, we'll keep building Raspberry Pi 2s.
Okay, thanks for talking to us.
Thank you.